there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, broad risk aversion hit emerging markets today as we saw fears about the fallout from escalating protests in Hong Kong and one of the worst sell-offs in Argentina's markets, pushing investors to look for safer assets today. MSCI's index of emerging market stocks down about 1% on the day, on course to erase all of its meager gains so far this year, with heavyweight Asian stock markets suffering sharp losses. On the continent, still quiet, but in South Africa, markets were down in line with Asian markets, but we did see retail holding firm Steinhoff up over 2% in trading today, as of course investors await for it to give an update on its restructuring plan. Now, also coming up on the show, South Africa and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He phones U.S. Treasury Secretary Mnuchin over additional tariffs on to provoke workers into a strike. Now, the offers tabled for a 3-year wage agreement varies, as Anglo-American Platinum offered about $65 in the first year, $52 offered by Impala Platinum, and we saw $46 for Sibanye's Rustenburg operations. However, Sibanye did make a wage offer for its Lonmin operations, starting with a $20 increase in the first year. Now, in response to this, the Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union handed over new demands of $1,107 for the lowest paid worker from the previous $814. The union adds it has adjusted the demand to an increase of $98 a year for category A and B workers, plus a 10% a year increase over the 3 years for skilled workers. Now, AMCU President Joseph Matunjwa briefed media in Johannesburg on the road ahead. Let's have a listen.
Impala has rejected it. At the same time, at Impala, members of AMCO, they've revised their demand. So we're still going to Lonmin, of which they never gave us a permission to have a mass meeting. We are going to Anglo this coming week after the commemoration, and then we'll take a mandate. And subsequent to that, we will call a big central mass meeting. So we are not negotiating for a strike, media people. We negotiate for better conditions of employment. That is what we are negotiating. So we are saying PGM prices have appreciated.
Well, CGTN's Angelo Coppola now joins us in Johannesburg with an update on the situation. Great to have you on the show, Angelo. Now, according to AMCU, Sibanye's offer is basically a slap in the face and an insult to workers. Sibanye, on the other hand, insists that AMCU's demands, especially at its Lonmin operations, they're not viable and they're unaffordable. So what are the chances, Angelo, that they're heading towards a strike?
Well, in fact, the first offer from Sibanye Stillwater to AMCU was actually a 0% increase. So the second offer was a slight jump up. Matunjwa, of course, was adamant that they, as you heard, aren't negotiating for a strike. They're negotiating for better service conditions for their workers. He also implied that Sibanye Stillwater are negotiating in bad faith. The backstory here is that Sibanye Stillwater won the gold wage negotiations against AMCU a couple of months ago. So there might be a bit of bad blood between AMCU and Sibanye. It isn't on track, and it isn't going in the right direction at the moment. So it's early days yet, but I think this is probably not going to end very well, Uche.
Well, AMCU says they are seeing steady but slow progress in its negotiations with the other two mining companies and, of course, Sibanye's other operations. What is the outlook for those talks?
Well, look, the talks are moving along. They're not moving along as quickly as both sides would want or coming to the conclusions that either party does want, but they are moving. As you heard just now, Lonmin operations management aren't allowing AMCU onto the site, on the mine site, to have a mass meeting to discuss the demands that they want to put on the table. At Impala, as you heard, management rejected that first offer. There's been a counter offer. So the door's open there. There is negotiation conversations that are happening. But talks with Anglo-American, I understand, that's Anglo-American Platinum, are going to be taking place sometime this week. And Matunjwa appears to have some faith in the Amplat CEO to do the right thing. In other words, to come quite close to the demands that they're putting on the table right now. They also had their results quite recently, and those numbers out of Amplats are looking quite good. So it's a bit of a stop-start affair at the moment, Uche.
Now, of course, back in 2014, Angelo, AMCU did lead the longest ever platinum mining strike in the country. That cost the mining sector about $2 billion in revenue. What would a strike cost the sector right now, especially given the fact that mining has dropped on a yearly basis? That's mining production, but it was showing signs of picking up month on month. So what could happen in the sector if we see another strike?
Well, look, it hasn't been quantified yet. There's still too many moving parts, the analysts are telling me. All three groups, of course, have said that they have cash reserves and they have a decent stockpile in place to ride out a possible or potential strike. Also, remember that the negotiations and the outcomes aren't dependent on each other. That's as far as we can tell, obviously. The AMCU strategy is still a well-kept secret, and Mnuchin is playing his cards quite close to his chest. So we're not sure what the play is going to be. But underlying all of this is a looming AMCU National Congress where Mnuchin's future role is going to be voted on by its members. So he obviously wants to go into that discussion or into that National Congress with some street cred, as it were. So he's going to want to be, it's still too early to tell. And last time round, that's in 2004, they underestimated that 5-month period of strike, and that's why there was that big cost that was lost by the platinum producers. Uche?
Well, Angela, looking at the mining sector as a whole, and certainly the outlook for the sector, we've seen share prices climbing this year, commodity prices on the rise, but still some analysts are saying that this has not translated into a renewal of confidence in the sector. Is this true? What is the outlook for the sector?
Well, look, there's a general lack of business confidence in South Africa at the moment. The big gorilla in the room, as you know, is Eskom, and whether it can get out of its debt pile mess that it's in, and whether it can provide the mines in this instance with the power that they need. And perhaps more importantly, that power is provided at a reasonable rate. We do know that Eskom is back at its regulators at the moment, trying to push for a bigger price increase next year and the year after and the year after that. And the Minerals Council has warned us several times that any spike in energy costs is going to lead to the closure of several marginal mines. Now, we're not talking about platinum specifically, we're just talking generally, adding significantly, of course, to that world record unemployment rate that we have in the country at the moment. So some clever thinking is going to be needed by government, labour and business. In this case, the mines and the mining operational people need to get together and keep costs down, while hoping that the resources prices stay elevated as they are at the moment, Uche.
Well, we'll continue to watch that closely. Many thanks, as always, Angelo, for your insights. That was Angelo Coppola joining us there in Johannesburg. Now, meanwhile, the latest Investec GIB Savings Index for South Africa shows that while some South African households do save, this is cancelled out by people who spend on credit cards, personal loans and overdrafts in order to make ends meet. Here's Angelo again with those details.
The author of the index, Professor Adrian Saville, says that corporate South Africa is doing a good job saving and investing. But there's no one funding the small and medium enterprises. Traditionally, that money comes from friends and family, and they aren't saving enough to invest.
A common perception is that the only way that I can save is if I earn more. But what we've got from a raft of countries that start on low income basis is that saving is actually a learned behavior, and that if you cut your cloth to your circumstance.
People earning variable incomes are probably the most challenged when it comes to saving.
As tough as it is, I am able to put some away. I'm planning to start something because I can't be working forever. At some point, I have to be doing something for myself. So I am managing to put some away. It's not much.
Some find it tougher to save than others, but spoiling yourself once in a while isn't a bad idea.
I am able to save, but it's very tough because you end up with literally nothing to spend on yourself. So it's a bit difficult to I'm saving towards my studies at the moment. That's the first thing that I'm saving towards, and the next thing would be a car and then a house and so on.
Saving to attain specific goals is hard work, and it will involve sacrifices.
Some things that I'm sacrificing here, especially on food. There are some that, if you look at it, it might be luxury if you look at it. So you have to sacrifice. Sometimes you just buy things to survive.
I become very disciplined. Anyone who tries to borrow money, it's a no, I don't have it. You basically become like a mean person in a way. But if you want your things to go in order, you have to make a little bit of sacrifices.
A savings culture in any country, in any household, is a learnt behavior, and the sooner we start to learn it, the sooner we can start saving.
So the best way to become a saver is to do exactly that, to start saving. How much? 1 is a number to start with.
I'm Angelo Coppola for CG10 in Sandton, South Africa.
Well, let's go to Zimbabwe now. The country is looking forward to increasing its power generation and improving its broadband capabilities. This, of course, follows 2 lines of credit lines worth $108 million from the export and import banks of China and India. Now, the economy has been struggling following the need for a rebound from the current recession. Here's CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya with the details.
Treasury has secured a $65.8 million loan from China's Export and Import Bank, which will go towards the state-owned mobile network operators' broadband upgrade. The 20-year funds at a concessionary rate of 2% interest will put up more base stations in areas that are currently suffering poor connectivity, as well as improve mobile penetration and upgrade the existing broadband service. A long-running cash crisis has forced many Zimbabweans to resort to mobile money payments. Although services have been mostly restricted to urban areas, the existing platforms have also been overloaded because of demand, challenges that should be resolved once the upgrade is complete. Another $23 million line of credit from the Indian Export and Import Bank will finance the fast-track renovation and upgrading of the Bulawayo thermal power plant. That will help ease the current drought-induced energy deficit, which has seen power generation cut in half, resulting in rolling power cuts across the country. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
And now let's look at our corporate headlines today. South Africa's Absa Bank has reported a 5% rise in its first half-year profit. The lender has been trying to regain ground following its split from parent company Barclays in 2017. However, it does face stiff competition and it is struggling with the effects of a weak economy. Absa is hoping its turnaround plan and a series of ambitious targets can help win back customers and investor confidence. Meanwhile, Kenya's mortgage provider Housing Finance has put up, or rather is selling, several high-end homes in an attempt to trim its non-performing loans portfolio. The houses put up for auction are estimated to be worth about $19.4 million, pointing to widespread distress in Kenya's real estate sector. Now, the mortgage firm is one of the many businesses in Kenya that have posted declining financial performance. South African retailer Steinhoff says it may consider the sale of assets as it aims to fight the fallout of a $7 billion accounting fraud scandal. The scandal hit firm's debt currently stands at about $10.09 billion, curbing the prospective aim to become a retail-focused investment holding firm. The company has been making losses of up to $4 billion a year since it initially flagged holes in its accounts in December 2000 in defiance of U.S. sanctions. The regulations put in place seek to prevent other countries from trading with the Caribbean nation in a push for change in its political model. However, Diageo's subsidiary company will not interact with any firm that operates or is based and registered in the United States. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's take a quick break now. Still to come. Welcome news over the Ebola cure, but what will be the cost to the coffers? And a Zambian court adjourns a corruption trial involving a former cabinet minister that prompted donors to freeze nearly $34 million in aid.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. we feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
For lucrative economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche Okoronkwo reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Now to one of our developing stories this hour. Protests at Hong Kong's international airport have turned violent a few hours ago. Protesters clashed with police after fights were disrupted for a second day. Now, Hong Kong's airport authority says operations at the airport had been seriously disrupted and that departing passengers had been unable to reach immigration counters. A journalist from the Beijing-based Global Times newspaper was assaulted and seriously injured by the rioters. Witnesses say that the man was wearing a yellow high-visibility vest and that protesters were demanding to see his press ID. Now, the rioters pinned him to the ground, seized his belongings and draped a "I Love HK Police" t-shirt over him as others tried to step in and stop the violence. The journalist was later rescued by Hong Kong police and received medical treatment on site. Meanwhile, Hong Kong police have again called for social order to be restored. The call came during a press conference on Tuesday in response to the increasing tensions between the police and protesters.
It's only because someone has broken the law that the police have to enforce the law. Many innocent citizens and even visitors of Hong Kong have been unfairly affected by protesters' reckless actions. I hope the public will understand that the police use force only as a means to containing the violent situations, and we always use force with restraint. We never wish to see any injury or casualties. If you still believe in peaceful, rational, and non-violent expression of speech, I appeal to you to cut ties with all rioters. We appeal to you to not let violence become a new norm. Please join us in restoring the order of society.
And heading back to the continent now, the World Health Organization has welcomed the news of effective Ebola treatments. The world body, though, added community engagement is still needed to stop the current outbreak. Here's CGTN's Asta Tal with more.
Ebola is now a curable disease. It's good news for the DRC, which has been battling the worst outbreak in its history. After trial testing 4 experimental drug treatments, 2 of those drugs emerged as the most effective treatment methods.
The preliminary results in 499 study participants indicated that those individuals receiving Regeneron or MAB 114 had a greater chance of survival compared to those participants with the other 2. These are great news, of course, and these news will save lives and moves us closer to finding an effective treatment for Ebola.
The treatments are most effective when a patient is diagnosed early on.
So let's not forget, we now have a vaccine which is highly efficacious. We have treatment which really shows good data. So overall, this is positive news. And these are great new tools or great tools for our toolbox. But it doesn't stop Ebola alone. What will stop Ebola, under the leadership of the government in the DRC, is good surveillance, good infection prevention and control, good community engagement, and excellent vaccinations.
The drugs will now be offered in 14 treatment centers across the country. Astatal, CGTN.
Now, it has been more than 5 years since the recent Ebola outbreak was discovered. CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy looks at the spread of the disease and medical interventions.
The Ebola outbreak from 2014 to 2016 was the largest outbreak since the virus was discovered and became known as the West Africa Ebola epidemic. It was widespread in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Now, the most recent Ebola outbreak is currently happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo's provinces of North Kivu and Ituri. Now, this Ebola outbreak has already claimed more than 1,700 lives. What makes this particular Ebola outbreak especially difficult to combat is that it is in conflict-affected areas, which has made it dangerous to access the affected people. This has resulted in this Ebola outbreak becoming the largest outbreak in DRC's history. World Health Organization declared the Ebola outbreak in DRC a public health emergency of international concern. Before 2014, West African countries had never experienced an Ebola outbreak, and they were unprepared for the disease. The world saw how fast Ebola can spread in an urban center without preparation. The many Ebola cases have been linked to traditional burial and funeral practices, which brings family and friends of the deceased in contact with the virus. A new collaborative study was identified and studied Ebola antibodies that could be used to design universal therapeutics that are effective against many different Ebola species. The World Health Organization decided to narrow an experiment with Ebola patients to 2 treatments that show real promise. Now, the current Ebola outbreak in the DRC is considered the second largest in history, killing at least 1,700 people. Violence in the region has limited efforts to fight the outbreak. Back to you.
Well, let's find out now what progress has been made on ground. We're joined now by Leon Senyange in Kinshasa. Leon, great to have you on the show. Now, certainly, this is major news for the DRC, where, of course, the most number of cases have been recorded. What's the progress so far in terms of disseminating these new treatments to the infected on ground?
Well, Uche, I really think it's early days just yet to determine just how much progress has been made so far in disseminating these particular new vaccines to the infected. It, however, now comes at a point in time just after 24 hours since the big announcement. And indeed, a big announcement it was, considering the fact that this particular epidemic of Ebola only stormed just in August in 2018 and has, well, about 2,800 people have contracted Ebola, 1,800 of those having lost their lives and succumbed to the virus. But of course, the announcement of this particular vaccine comes as a very big positive way towards fighting Ebola in this particular epidemic. And of course, there's quite a lot of work still to be done by the World Health Organization and even the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo in trying to ensure that the numbers that have been affected by the epidemic and this particular point in time can actually be vaccinated with these particular medicines that have come through. Of course, we have been told that there's a 90% survival rate given the trials that have come through, so definitely this could just about be the silver lining in this particular epidemic.
Now, you are quite right. It's quite early to determine how well this new drugs are doing. But we did just see some of the world's major drug companies, such as GlaxoSmithKline. They stopped the production of Ebola vaccines. They say they're not considered profitable given the current number of Ebola cases on ground. So given this, though we know these new drugs are still at trial stage, what do we know about their production, what their cost is going to be, and certainly when they'll hit the market in countries like DRC?
Well, what we at least know now is that one company in the United States of America has been handed the license to produce these particular vaccines. But going back to the beginning of it all is that it quite costs an amount of money in the research and development of these particular vaccines. It's a lengthy process, it's a complex process, and just still the vaccines that were put out were on trial since about November. So it's been a process that has cost some of these companies and a big amount of money, even still none that you could actually put a figure to. But there is still positive news to this, that while it is on a trial basis, there's still quite a lot of evaluations to be done. There's still quite a lot of work to be done and involve other stakeholders like the World Health Organization and even still the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo to ensure that at whatever point in time that these vaccines are ready, they are affordable, and if anything, they come just about in the right time to, again, put an end to this particular epidemic.
Now, speaking of what is still to be done, the government does say it has enough of these new drugs to reach most of the infected people, but of course they are still facing some obstacles. Some of them include the regions where there is conflict. Give us a sense of what these obstacles are that they're facing, how serious they are, also in terms of preventing more new cases in the country.
Well, the epidemic here in the Democratic Republic of Congo has had quite a lot of complexities around it. It started in August of 2018, claimed quite a big number of people therein, and still the biggest obstacle therein, of course, is the mistrust within the communities. That is, the communities that have been affected, and especially those in the eastern part of the DRC. Many feel that the standardized methods of treatment do not quite come in handy for them. Many have resorted to go into the traditional healers now. That, of course, is facts coming from the health ministry here that says about 40% of the people within those communities that have been affected prefer to use traditional healers. But that in itself is not the only obstacle. Some of the other issues therein is a safety of the health workers. Several have been attacked. The World Health Organization says that about 5 health workers have lost their lives just about this year, and these, of course, are affected in particular areas like the North Kivu there and the Ituri region, where several rebels and militia groups have attacked not just the health workers themselves, but also destroyed the facilities, affected transportation of the necessities there that come in trying to curb the Ebola, the spread of Ebola virus. So definitely several obstacles have been there, but even still at this point in time, there's quite a lot of work to be done to ensure that while these are put aside and with a new vaccine coming through, there would be a lot of headway in trying to put an end to the epidemic.
Well, many thanks, Leon, for that update. Of course, that was Leon Senyange joining us there in Kinshasa. Well, let's move on now. A Zambian court has adjourned until September the start of a corruption trial involving a former cabinet minister that prompted some Western donors to freeze nearly $34 million in aid to the Southern African nation. Now, the case is a test on how President Edgar Lungu is addressing corruption in a government that is struggling with slow economic growth, high debt and shrinking foreign currency reserves. Following the aid freeze, Lungu fired Community Development and Social Welfare Minister Emerine Kabanchi, who was in charge of those funds. Kabanchi was later charged with the failure to follow procedures and guidelines relating to the engagement of a government-owned company, which distributed the funding. Now, Kabanchi, who denies any wrongdoing, was not in court on Tuesday. Meanwhile, Uganda's consulate in Mombasa, Kenya, is hosting the 3rd Trade and Business Facilitation Symposium. At the event, Uganda's Consul General to Mombasa, Ambassador Katurebe Tayebwa, urged Ugandans to take advantage of the expansion of the Mombasa port and the completed standard gauge railway leg to Nairobi in order to export or import more goods, but also lower transport costs. Now, Tayebwa said the expanded facilities will give Ugandan exporters an opportunity to bring in more goods. Citing Ugandan tea going through the Mombasa tea auction as an example, of course, Mombasa is a major gateway for East Africa, and Uganda's share of imports and exports amount to about 82% of all transit cargo through this port. And in Kenya, Kisumu in the western part of the country has undergone rapid growth in terms of infrastructure. Now, in just under 10 years, the lakeside city has seen an increase in highways and bridges that have extensively transformed its status. Now, in conjunction with the national government, local authorities are set to commission its reconstructed port that has otherwise been dormant for the last 20 years. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangari deciphering what this could mean for residents in the Greater Lake Victoria Basin.
Kisumu City is on track in commissioning its newly rehabilitated port, which is situated on Lake Victoria in the western region of Kenya. The port has been underutilized for years, despite its immense potential and strategic positioning to serve the landlocked countries in the Great Lakes region. This has been blamed on the invasion of hyacinth, which is a weed that grows uncontrollably in the lake, a poor transport system, and the state of its landing sites. In 2017, the Kenyan government signed an agreement with China Exim Bank for a $140 million loan to finance its construction. The newly refurbished port is also the county government's plan to rearrange the city's geological structure to favor economic activity.
There's one unfortunate thing that Kisumu as a city, or as a town for that matter, where it started, grew with its back to the lake. If you look at the shops in front of the lake on Obote Road, they turn their backs to the lake, which is very unfortunate because in most towns or cities on waterfronts, facilities always turn their front to the lake and then interact with the lakefront economy to their own advantage.
In its heyday, the Kisumu port was an important passenger and cargo hub. It interlinked Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania through the Port Bell, Jinja, Bukoba, and Mwanza ports. Uganda, which is the main user of the port, accounts for more than 90% of cargo due to its landlocked nature. With its recent reconstruction, the port hopes to revive trade and economic ties within the Lake Victoria Basin.
Kenya Pipeline Company has built a jetty on the other side of the lake, not on this side, near the airport, past the KPC depot there. And that jetty is going to put petroleum products into tankers and ships destined for points around the lake in Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and so on. And so that is for bringing in revenue.
So the lakefront development on the side of Kisumu aims at improving all the infrastructure around this other side, so that marine transport or marine transport, which is envisaged, can be possible. Yeah, and at the same time, it will not just be marine; it will also be the transports, passengers moving from Kisumu within East Africa and within Kenya.
The current export tonnage at Kisumu port stands at 21,000 tons. Once the revamped port is commissioned, the Kenya Ports Authority expects this figure to grow to up to 410,000 tons monthly by 2035. Terry Wangari, CGTN, Kisumu, Kenya.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now. Still coming up on the show. Chinese Vice Premier Liu He phones U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin over additional tariffs on Chinese imports. And Singapore cuts its annual growth forecast over the escalating U.S.-China trade war.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Let's quickly recap today's top headlines. In the DRC, 2 Ebola victims have been cured by experimental treatments. Now, the pair had been a part of a group of 4 diagnosed with the disease in Goma. They've so far been reunited with their families. They had taken part in the trial treatment with scientists using 4 drugs in efforts to cure the hemorrhagic fever. The drugs were developed using antibodies harvested from Ebola survivors. The 2 drugs are called REG and EB3 and MAB114. Both drugs resulted in 60% of the 681 tested patients surviving. And over 500 rescued migrants on board 2 rescue vessels remain stranded at sea as the NGO ships search for a safe port that will take them. The Ocean Viking ship, run by Doctors Without Borders, along with the Franco-German charity SOS Mediterranee, rescued about 81 people on Sunday and another 105 on Monday. Spanish NGO Open Arms has been at sea for about 12 days and is still waiting for a safe port to disembark the 151 migrants it rescued. No European state member has asked the European Union to coordinate the disembarking in its countries. And South Africa's Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union is disappointed by a wage offer for workers at Lonmin, which was acquired by Sibanye Stillwater this year. The offers tabled for a 3-year wage agreement varies as Anglo-American Platinum offered $65 in the first year, $52 was offered by Impala Platinum, and $46 for Sibanye's Rustenburg operations. AMCU says Sibanye Stillwater's offer is provoking them to go on strike. And Hong Kong police have again called for social order to be restored. The call came during a press conference on Tuesday in response to the increasing tensions between the police and protesters. Now, Hong Kong International Airport has cancelled all remaining flights for a second day. All check-ins were suspended from about 4:30 p.m. local time. The airport has been the site of major protests since last Friday. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Now, Chinese Vice Premier Liu He held a phone conversation with U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin late Tuesday. In those talks, China expressed their concern over U.S. additional tariffs on Chinese imports starting September 1st. The USTR had announced that certain items were being removed from the new tariff list because of health, safety, national security, and other factors, while tariffs on other items would be delayed until December 15th. Well, last month, President Trump announced a new round of 10% tariffs on about $300 billion worth of Chinese imports that eluded duties in the earlier round announced in May. The news of certain electronics, footwear and apparel tariffs being delayed eased some pressure on some of the major retailers that suffered in recent weeks. Nike, Kohl's, Nordstrom, Apple and Best Buy were all trading higher on markets. Now, despite uncertainty in global markets due to that China-US trade war, overseas investment into China still remains strong this year. Here's a review of that.
China is still attractive to overseas investors. Latest government data shows China received $79 billion of investments from overseas in the first 7 months of the year, an increase of nearly 4% compared with the same period a year ago.
High-tech sectors saw significant growth. Aircraft and spacecraft equipment, electronics, telecommunication equipment, and medicine received over 30% more of overseas investment compared to the same period of last year. Foreign investment in high-tech services also grew more than 60%.
The China-US trade war is taking its toll. A survey by the American Chamber of Commerce in China shows that 65% of its member companies are concerned about the trade tension and are tempering their business strategies accordingly. Amid this, however, government data shows China is enjoying optimistic growth in foreign investment.
Investment from China's major source of foreign capitals is not slowing down. Investment from Germany and South Korea has increased about 70%.
Businesses are on edge as long as the trade dispute remains unresolved. But amid all that, the same survey from the American Chamber of Commerce shows 62% of companies still see China as one of their top 3 global investment priorities. Rob Rashke, CGTN.
And to Singapore now, the country has further cut its annual growth forecast as the escalating US-China trade war hammers its exports in another ominous sign for Asia trade-reliant economies. The government says it expected growth of 0.0 to 1.0% this year, sharply down from the 1.5 to 2.5% previously estimated. That, of course, marks the second downward revision this year. The economy expanded 3.2% in 2018, and experts say the export hub is highly sensitive to external shocks and has traditionally been one of the first places in Asia to be hit during global downturns. The Singapore Trade Ministry says the growth prospects of key emerging markets and developing economies have, of course, worsened, and that's partly due to the escalation of trade conflict in recent months. Now, the ministry also added that US President Donald Trump's threats of additional tariffs could severely dent global business and global confidence. And in South Korea, innovative designs increasingly play a decisive role in consumers' food preferences. The country's snack companies made more efforts to transform traditional snacks and offer creative flavors, shapes, or even cute packaging ideas in order to cater for consumer needs. Let's take a look.
The Chocolate Pie House, located in the Gangnam District, Seoul City, sells an updated version of South Korea's traditional snack, chocolate pie. Its size is around 1.5 times of a normal pie and made with 100% cocoa butter, natural vanilla, and French cream. The company used 1 year to develop the new recipe. So far, the company has launched 7 flavors like caramel, coca, and red velvet. The pie is priced at 2,500 won each, which equals to around 14 yuan. This updated version could only be purchased in special stores located in airports and shopping malls, and each store could sell over 1,000 pies per day.
The flavor is quite different than the usual, and with the dedicated packaging, I probably will send the pies as gifts for my friends.
Another creative way to innovate South Korea's traditional food is to incorporate Western-style cooking. Take the South Korean sweet cake, for example. It's made mainly from honey, sesame oil, and rice, and it is deep-fried. Many young consumers think they're greasy and unhealthy. Recently, some vendors used the cooking style of the famous French snack macarons to innovate it.
The Western-style baking could offer tender taste for the cake. Consumers aged around 30s to 40 years old who still hold emotional feelings for this traditional snack like our macaron cakes a lot.
More and more creative products are emerging from the South Korean snack market, such as shaved ice made from pineapples and honeydew melons, and Oreo cookies flavored rice cakes. The country's snack market is estimated to reach 9 trillion won in the near term. Tracy Chang, CGTN.
Now, China is now the world's largest video surveillance equipment producer, providing more than half of the market's video camera products. One of the manufacturers, Dahua, is setting up business throughout the world, while Xu Zhaoquan takes a look at how they're faring in the South American market.
Sightseeing in Santiago may be safer than ever before. That's because evil behavior will be spotted by these cameras. Surveillance products by Chinese company Dahua are now being used by local mining industries, police, government, and even the Air Force. Local officials in a suburb of Santiago say this equipment is widely used in maintaining local security management.
The illegal actions in the streets have dropped by 97% since the cameras and surveillance system were put into operation.
Compared to similar products from developed Western countries, Chinese-made products are usually cheaper and just as reliable.
Basically, about 99% of Dahua's products are independently developed and produced by us. We have our own research and development team and even our own factories, which develop and produce our core components.
Localization of management is the key to being accepted in the local market.
We are working together closely with local companies. They have been here for years and have mature experience and ideas. By combining the advantages of our both sides, we can jointly make the market deeper and better.
There is a huge space for the two countries to do a lot more. Fortunately, the business cooperation started to boom in 2018. The effects of the Belt and Road Initiative are being seen from these substantial business projects like port construction and high-tech industries, as well as plantations.
Chile is one of the best economies in Latin America. The so-called narrowest country is providing a wide market for the business sectors from both China and the rest of the world. Xu Zhaoquan, CGTN, Santiago de Chile.
And shifting focus now, let's take a look at how commodities performed today. Gold prices hitting a more than 6-year high as, of course, unrest in Hong Kong and a rout in the Argentine peso drove investors, who, of course, are already spooked by the US-China trade war, into havens such as bullion at the expense of riskier assets such as stocks. Meanwhile, oil prices falling on lingering concerns over global demand as well as rising US production, though expectations for major producers to further curtail output did offer some support to prices. Well, let's head into a quick break now. Still to come. A Ugandan entrepreneur creates box gardens to aid farmers with little production spaces.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Now, in Uganda, an entrepreneur has found a creative solution to improve household incomes in urban areas by creating a farm in a box. Now, the invention is designed to help urban farmers with little spaces plant fruit and vegetables for themselves or for sale. Here's CGTN's Isabel Nakiria with their story.
Farming in a box garden in the capital, Kampala. Moses Matovo designed this vertical farm out of wood to help households with little space for large-scale farming.
We put the first tray
put the soil, put the second tray, and that's how we do it. You just keep stacking trays together. We can even make it 5 feet or 10 feet high. But we are cognizant of the fact that the user must be able to operate the vermicomposting chamber. So it should be at the height where the user can easily access it.
The box farm contains a chamber in the middle where organic fertilizer is applied to boost yields. Up to 200 plants can be grown in these stacked trays of wood. Planting spots are left on each of the trays, and a farmer can be able to harvest enough vegetables for home consumption in this garden in a box. Matovu comes from a farming family, but when he moved to the city, he had nowhere to grow crops, so he came up with a box farming idea.
The land was very small. It was there was a lot of erosion going on. Each time we put sacks to grow crops, it was very hard. They would be washed away by the rains, and so we started using boxes, playing around with boxes, and that's when we eventually came up with this kind of box that you see, the vertical farm.
Matovu has sold his box farms to about 65 people in Kampala, many of them stay-home mothers. Each box farm goes for about $200. Doreen Atukunda says her box farm is her market and source of income.
Started with skuma wheat, and I plucked. I even started selling to the neighbors. You know, when you have these many neighbors, give us some, because no, I'm selling. So I used to pluck like 7 leaves, 500, 7 leaves, 500. So at the end of the day, I used to eat and to sell a little bit of them.
Kampala's population has increased significantly in recent years, more than 20% in the last 3 years, reducing space for farming. Matovu hopes to craft out more space-saving farms to suit both low-income and high-income urban farmers so they can be able to earn sustainable income. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, let's now head to Sweden, where Nespresso is partnering with local bike brand Velocity to produce a stylish bicycle which is made from recycled aluminium coffee capsules. The new bike is literally turning recycling into cycling. Here's more on that story.
This bike's frame is made in large part from around 300 used espresso coffee capsules, while the rest is made using recycled aluminium. Jimmy Ostlom is the CEO of Swedish brand Velocity, which designed the bike.
People don't really understand the full potential in recycling. I mean, you could look at it as waste, but I prefer to look at it as the beginning of something, absolutely beautiful, as my bike.
Nespresso has faced criticism for adding pressure to the planet, with campaigners saying many of their capsules end up in landfills. This is part of the company's efforts to encourage customers to recycle the used pods and show that functional objects can be made from the material produced. Aluminium is known as infinitely recyclable, with no limit to the number of times it can be reused. But in the UK, Nespresso pods cannot be put in household recycling bins, and the product's current recycling rate is only 28%.
It's frustrating it's not higher. Our vision is that there's absolutely no reason why any capsule should go to landfill. It's about just making that little bit of an effort to actually do the recycling.
The bikes, branded Recycle, are available to buy from mid-August. They cost around $1,400. Michael Karanja, CGTN.
Now, date palm wines are popular in Sudan and North Africa. In Tunisia, locals enjoy a delicately made date palm juice, often served during meals, breaking the fast in the Middle East. Let's take a look.
A producer of the Tunisian date palm beverage must have an expert hand and not be too greedy to draw the sap from the palm, or else could risk killing it. That's the delicate balance of art and craft in making the prized local brew known as legmi.
When choosing the palm tree and before making the cut, it is necessary to choose a big and mature palm tree for good quality legmi to drink and a good amount of juice extraction.
As soon as the sun is up, people in southern Tunisia rush out to buy a glass or bottle of legmi, a coveted palm date drink that is too delicate to be sold far from the oasis.
Every day I sell between 40 and 50 liters from spring until October. In November it gets colder. People want warmer things to eat and drink, so they do not want cold.
Rida Omran is in his 60s and has been harvesting the nectar for decades since learning the technique at the age of 14 from a relative in the oasis of Nahal. He now refers to himself as the prince of the palm tree.
In the summer, legmi has its own specifications and not everyone can make it. In summer, it is fragile because of the heat. The temperature is very, very high. It is fragile, so it cannot sit in the heat because it rots and becomes vinegar.
A 1.5-liter bottle sells for just under $1, and even at its fairly priced rate and roughly bottled state, the brew is delectable.
It's our breakfast here because it's full of good sugar. It gives people energy. There are people, instead of having a croissant and coffee, have legmi instead. Legmi is good for the body.
The legmi is a palm juice. We are used to consuming it especially in the morning and sometimes even in the afternoon. I came here to buy legmi, especially because I have guests who are here for a wedding in Tunis and I want to please them with legmi.
So every harvest, Rida carefully cuts the bark, but is keen not to touch the heart of the palm tree, otherwise it dies. He harvests from each tree before letting them rest for 4 years, producing around 8,000 liters annually. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Well, before we go, a quick look at Africa's currencies today. We saw Kenya's shilling steady. It was supported by inflows from portfolio investors who are buying government debt. Meanwhile, South Africa's rand weakening for a third straight session as, of course, global growth worries linked to that trade spat between China and the US and a soaring local sentiment kept investors eyeing key selling levels today. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Of course, you can send us your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.